My alien roommate went into heat. Stuck together during lockdown, Jake had never thought much about the alien roommate situation. It seemed like a great way to split rent and get by in the crowded city. Jara, the alien from Nyx, was quiet and kept mostly to herself. She was one of the many aliens who had settled on Earth in recent years, a result of intergalactic treaties, and though she had been kind, Jake never expected them to become close friends. They were just roommates. Jara wasn't like the typical aliens Jake had heard about in the news. She didn't have tentacles or crazy, unpredictable behavior. She looked humanoid enough, except for her light blue skin, long antennae that sprouted from the top of her head, and silvery eyes. The first time they met, he had been nervous, but after a couple of weeks, things settled into a routine. Jara kept to herself, spending most of her time studying human cultures, trying to understand Earth in a way that was almost scholarly. The last few days had been strangely quiet. The news was all about the rising number of cases for some strange virus, and then the government had announced a mandatory planetary lockdown. Nobody could leave their city. Jake's office had gone remote, and Jara's work as a scientist researching Earth's ecosystems had also been suspended. The planet-wide quarantine meant the two of them were now stuck in the apartment together for an indefinite period. Jake had always enjoyed his privacy, but something about the lockdown made him nervous. Having Jara around was fine. It wasn't like they'd ever gotten in each other's way. But being confined to the apartment for weeks, that was different. He had no idea what kind of strain the situation would put on both of them. One evening, after their usual dinner of takeout, Jake noticed that Jara was acting off. She hadn't spoken much all day, but she was now pacing around the apartment, her antennae twitching nervously. Jake glanced over at her, concerned, but didn't want to intrude on her space. She was always so calm, even a little reserved. "Is everything okay?" he asked, breaking the silence. Jara turned to face him, her silvery eyes wide with discomfort. "It's nothing," she said quietly, but Jake could tell she wasn't being entirely truthful. "Are you sure? You don't seem like yourself." Jara hesitated for a moment before answering. "I'm just not feeling well. It's a part of my species' cycle. I'm going into heat." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Heat? What do you mean?" Jara looked a little embarrassed, her antennae drooping slightly. "It's something that happens every few years. We Nyxians go through a biological phase that's similar to what you humans call heat. It's a necessary part of reproduction, but it's also uncomfortable, and I don't have the proper environment to deal with it here, not without my people." Jake didn't know what to say. He'd heard about alien biology before, of course. Nyxians were a peaceful species, but they were also different in ways he could never fully understand. He was trying to grasp what this heat phase meant for Jara, but it didn't make sense. She looked fine, at least physically. "But what does this mean for you?" Jake asked, his voice tentative. He didn't want to offend her, but he also didn't want to ignore what she was saying. They were roommates, and even if she was an alien, they had to work together in this situation. Jara sighed. "It means I need to stay close to another living being. Without that, my body can't regulate its temperature properly. I may not survive this phase without assistance." Jake's eyes widened. "You're saying you need me?" Jara nodded slowly. "Yes, you are the only one here. And as difficult as this is to explain, I am unable to leave the apartment during this phase. I can't go back to Nyx either, not with everything locked down." The room felt oddly still after Jara's words sank in. Jake was completely taken off guard. He had never imagined something like this happening, let alone that his alien roommate might need him in such an intimate, biological way. They had always kept their distance, never crossing personal boundaries. He wasn't even sure if this was the kind of thing they should be talking about. "I don't know what to do," Jake admitted after a long pause. Jara looked at him, her face almost pleading. "I know this is strange. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. But without your help, I might not be able to make it through this cycle. It's that serious." Jake sat down, trying to process everything. He couldn't believe this was happening. He was just trying to survive a boring lockdown, and now his alien roommate was in a life-or-death situation. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. "Okay, so what do I do?" he asked, his voice less uncertain now. Jara explained that, in her species, the heat phase was a vulnerable time. The Nyxians required the presence of another sentient being to regulate their body heat, prevent emotional instability, and keep them grounded. While it wasn't sexual in nature, it was a deep connection based on the need for survival. She needed to stay close to him for her health and also to stay sane during the phase. Jake didn't know what kind of strange bond they would form from this. All he knew was that Jara was his responsibility now. Her life, quite literally, depended on his ability to adapt to this new, unexpected situation. Just as he was about to ask more questions, Jara collapsed onto the couch, her breathing shallow. Her skin had turned a deeper blue, almost glowing. Jake immediately rushed over to her, his heart pounding in his chest. What was happening to her? Jara, are you okay? Jake asked frantically. Jara's eyes flickered open, and she spoke in a voice Jake had never heard before, an eerie, almost otherworldly tone. I need you, Jake. Please help me. She wasn't the same calm, intelligent person he had shared an apartment with for the last few months. This wasn't just a biological crisis. It was something that reached into her very core, a vulnerability Jake had never seen before. His mind raced. Could he really do this? Could he really help her? He didn't know anything about alien biology, and certainly not about helping someone through something like this. But one thing was clear: Jara was depending on him now. And he wasn't about to leave her to face this alone. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Jake stood by Jara, his mind racing as he watched her breathe heavily on the couch. Her normally calm demeanor had shifted into something desperate, something he couldn't quite understand. The situation had taken a turn Jake had never anticipated, and he was uncertain of how to proceed. Jara was depending on him now. Her skin, which was usually a soft shade of blue, had taken on a deeper hue. Her breathing was labored, and she appeared to be struggling. Jake had never seen her like this. She had always been so composed, so poised, and now she looked vulnerable in a way he couldn't ignore. The alien biology he had read about in textbooks and seen in documentaries didn't prepare him for this. Jara, Jake said softly, crouching next to her. He placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to comfort her in the only way he knew how. Her skin felt unnaturally warm, like she was running a fever. She opened her eyes slowly, and there was a strange mix of fear and need in them. I'm sorry, she whispered weakly. I didn't want to burden you. I didn't want to put you in this position. Jake shook his head. You're not a burden, you're my roommate. I can't just sit here while you're going through this, but I don't know what to do. Jara's eyes seemed to soften slightly at his words, but the struggle was still visible. She looked exhausted. It's not your fault, she said. I wasn't expecting this to happen. The cycle is something my people go through every few years. It's essential for our survival. We need to bond with another sentient being during this time. It's how we regulate our temperature, our emotional state. Without it, we can't survive the cycle. Jake nodded slowly, processing the information. He had learned a bit about the Nyxian species before Jara had moved in, but there was no way to fully understand what she was experiencing. All he knew was that the situation was serious, and his first instinct was to help her. Okay, Jake said. So, what do I need to do? Jara took a deep breath, and her voice was barely above a whisper. I need you to stay close to me, not just physically, but emotionally. My body needs the presence of another being. The connection is what keeps me stable. Without it, I risk losing control of my heat. My temperature will continue to rise, and it could be dangerous. Jake was beginning to grasp the seriousness of the situation. Jara's heat wasn't just a biological inconvenience. It was something that could kill her if not properly managed. He wasn't sure how he could help her emotionally, but he wasn't going to let her suffer. He sat down next to her on the couch, the two of them close but not quite touching. He wasn't sure what the connection was that Jara spoke of, but he was willing to try anything to make her feel more comfortable. Is this normal for your species? Jake asked, his voice soft. He wasn't sure if it was an appropriate question, but he needed to understand. He didn't want to make her situation worse by doing the wrong thing. Jara nodded faintly. Yes. It's a natural part of our life cycle. It's not something we can control, and we don't talk about it much. In fact, not even the humans know the full extent of what we go through. It's considered a private matter. I should have gone home to Nick's, but the lockdown? She trailed off, looking frustrated, but mostly she seemed ashamed. Jake felt a pang of sympathy for her. She was from a distant planet, far away from everything she knew, and now she was stuck here, alone, facing something that no one on Earth would understand. He wanted to help her, to do whatever he could to make her feel safe, but the more he learned about her cycle, the more he realized how little he actually understood. He decided to just be there for her in the way she needed. I don't know much about alien biology, Jake admitted, but I can stay close to you. I'll do whatever it takes. Jara's antennae twitched slightly at his words, and she gave him a weak smile. Thank you, she said, her voice trembling slightly. You don't have to do this. I don't want to force you into anything. She hesitated, looking vulnerable. I'm scared. Jake's heart softened. Jara wasn't just an alien species. She was someone who needed help. She was scared and alone in a way that made Jake realize just how much they had in common, despite their differences. Being stuck on a strange planet, facing an uncertain future, it wasn't so different from his own fears about the world outside the apartment. I know you're scared, Jake said gently, but you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here for you, okay? We'll figure this out together. Jara's eyes seemed to brighten a little at his words. She closed them for a moment, breathing in deeply, her body still trembling from the heat. Jake wasn't sure how long this phase would last or how much worse it would get, but one thing was clear. He couldn't let her suffer. He had to help her no matter what it took. For the rest of the evening, Jake stayed by Jara's side. He didn't know what else to do, but he made sure she was as comfortable as possible. He brought her water, adjusted the temperature of the room, and even tried to distract her by talking about random things. At times, she seemed more alert. At other times, her eyes would droop, and she'd lean heavily against the couch, exhausted. As the night wore on, Jara's condition didn't improve. If anything, it seemed to worsen. Her skin glowed brighter, and her breathing became more erratic. Jake felt helpless, unsure of what to do next. He wished there was someone else he could call, someone who might understand what was happening. But it was just the two of them in this strange situation, and Jake was the only one who could help her. Jara, I'm not sure what's happening, Jake said softly. It's like your body is fighting something. Is this normal for your cycle? Jara opened her eyes, her gaze flickering with a mixture of frustration and pain. Yes, this is part of it. The cycle forces us into a state of vulnerability. Our bodies react in ways that we can't control. It's hard to stay calm, but I need to. If I don't, it could push me to a state of complete imbalance. I could lose myself. Jake swallowed hard. The idea of Jara losing control frightened him. She wasn't just a roommate. She was someone he had come to care about. The thought of her being at the mercy of something she couldn't control was terrifying. He didn't want her to feel like she had to go through this alone. He reached out and gently took her hand, holding it in his own. It wasn't a romantic gesture, not at this point, but it was the only way he knew to offer her comfort. Jara looked at him in surprise, but she didn't pull away. Instead, her grip on his hand tightened slightly, as if her body was instinctively seeking reassurance. Stay with me, Jara whispered, her voice strained. I don't know how much longer I can do this on my own. Jake nodded, his hand steadying hers. I'm here, Jara. I'm not going anywhere. For the rest of the night, Jake stayed by her side, the two of them bound by a shared sense of urgency and connection. Jake didn't know what was coming next or how long it would take for Jara to recover, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to leave her alone. Jara had trusted him with her life, and he wasn't about to let her down. Jake didn't sleep much that night. Every time he glanced at Jara, her condition seemed to worsen. He could feel the heat radiating from her body, and her breathing remained shallow, like she was struggling to stay afloat in a sea of discomfort. Her body was in turmoil, and there was nothing Jake could do to stop it. He had read some basics about Nyxian biology, things like their physical resilience and advanced intelligence. But this was nothing like he had ever imagined. He was used to taking care of himself, figuring things out alone, but with Jara's life at stake, he had to rely on something more than his knowledge. He had to trust his instincts, and more than that, he had to trust her. Jara, he said softly, nudging her gently. She was curled up on the couch, her body trembling under the blanket he had thrown over her earlier. How are you feeling? Her silver eyes opened slowly, and for a moment she seemed lost in a daze. I'm fine, she whispered, though the faint tremor in her voice betrayed her. It's just hard. Jake sat next to her, watching her closely. Her skin had taken on an even deeper shade of blue, and the faint glow of her body illuminated the darkened apartment. It was a surreal sight, as if the light came from within her, an inner warmth that was as beautiful as it was troubling. You're not fine, Jake said quietly. You're struggling, and I'm here to help you through this. Jara shook her head slightly, though the gesture seemed weak. You don't have to, she said, her voice cracking. You've already done more than enough. You're only human. You don't know what it's like to go through this. The heat. It's beyond what you can imagine. Jake didn't know how to respond to that. He wasn't sure what it was like to be Nixian, but he could see how much she was suffering. He had never seen Jara like this, vulnerable and unguarded. She had always been the calm, intelligent alien who spent her days studying Earth's ecosystems, writing reports, and keeping to herself. But now, she was a far cry from the composed person he had known. The situation was entirely out of his control, and that frightened him. But the fear didn't stem from Jara being alien. It came from the fact that she needed him, and in this strange and difficult moment, there was no one else who could help her. "I'm not leaving," Jake said firmly, his voice filled with determination. "I don't care if I don't understand everything that's happening. I'm not leaving you alone." Jara looked at him, her eyes softening for the briefest of moments. There was something about his unwavering presence that seemed to ease the anxiety in her. She let out a small, shaky breath, and a flicker of relief passed through her. "I don't deserve your help," she murmured. "I'm just an alien. I don't belong here." Jake frowned, his hand instinctively reaching out to her, though he wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do. He didn't want to intrude on her space, but he also didn't want her to feel isolated. Her fear, her discomfort were all too real. He could see it in the way her body moved, the way she reacted to every little sound or shift of air. "You do belong here, Jara," Jake said softly, his fingers brushing against her arm. "You've been here long enough to be more than just an alien in my apartment. You're my roommate, you're my friend, and I'm not going to let you suffer through this alone." Jara's antennae twitched ever so slightly, and she closed her eyes, as if trying to block out the wave of emotions that rushed through her. She had never been one to express vulnerability, especially to a human. But the bond between them had grown over the course of the lockdown, and she could no longer deny the connection that was forming. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something deeper, something she had never expected to experience. "I don't know how to handle this," Jara confessed, her voice almost too soft to hear. "I've been taught to control everything, my emotions, my body, but this is beyond me. I can't stop it. It's like I'm losing myself, Jake." Jake's heart clenched at her words. He had never thought of Jara as anything other than the composed, intelligent alien who lived next door. But now, he saw her for who she truly was, someone who had been thrust into an unfamiliar and painful situation, with no one to rely on except him. "You're not losing yourself," Jake said gently, his hand resting on hers. "You're just going through something difficult, but you're strong, Jara. I believe in you." Jara looked at him, her silvery eyes filled with something she couldn't quite define. It wasn't just gratitude, it was a mixture of fear, hope, and trust. She had never wanted to burden anyone with her struggles, let alone a human. But in this moment, Jake's presence was like a lifeline, something she desperately needed. "I don't know how much longer I can keep fighting this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Every part of me is telling me to isolate myself, to hide, but I can't. I need you to stay with me." Jake didn't hesitate. He moved closer, sitting beside her and gently pulling her into his arms. It wasn't romantic, not in the way Jara might have once imagined. It was a simple gesture of comfort, of solidarity. She needed him now more than ever, and Jake wasn't going to let her face this alone. For a long while, they sat together in silence. Jara's body remained warm, too warm, as her temperature fluctuated in unpredictable waves. But with Jake beside her, her racing heartbeat slowed just a little. The connection between them was growing, becoming something that neither of them had anticipated when they first became roommates. Jake felt something stir in him, too. It wasn't just empathy. It was a deep sense of responsibility, a desire to make sure Jara was okay. He had never been one to get emotionally involved with anyone, especially not an alien. But this was different. Jara wasn't just an alien to him anymore. She was someone he cared about. He rested his chin on her shoulder, offering her a steady presence. "I'm not going anywhere, Jara. I'm here for you through this and whatever comes after." Jara remained still in his arms, her body trembling less now. The heat was still there, but the fear in her eyes had begun to soften, replaced with a strange sense of peace. She wasn't sure if it was the warmth of Jake's embrace or the simple fact that someone was there to help her, but she felt less alone. "Thank you, Jake," she whispered. "I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you." Jake smiled softly, though she couldn't see it. "You don't have to thank me," he said quietly. "This is what friends do for each other. We take care of each other when we need it the most." It was a simple truth, but one that made Jara's heart swell with an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. Gratitude, yes, but something deeper, something closer to affection. The night passed slowly, but with Jake's presence beside her, the worst of the heat began to fade. Jara's breathing became more regular, her temperature more stable. She wasn't entirely out of the woods, but she was starting to feel like herself again. The connection between her and Jake had shifted in a way neither of them had expected, but it had brought them closer than ever. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the apartment windows, Jake knew that this was just the beginning. Jara's heat might be over for now, but their bond, whatever it had become, would last long after the lockdown ended. The days following Jara's intense heat phase were quieter, but Jake could feel the shift in the air. There was a sense of calm between them now, an understanding that hadn't existed before. While Jara had recovered physically, there was an unspoken bond that had formed, something deeper than just the shared experience of being roommates. They had shared something profound, something that had connected them in a way Jake couldn't fully explain. For Jara, it was more than just the relief of surviving her heat. It was the quiet realization that, despite everything, she wasn't alone in this strange, foreign world. She had always kept her emotions tightly controlled, focusing only on her work and keeping herself at a distance from others. But with Jake, things had changed. He had shown her a side of humanity that she hadn't known existed. Compassion, understanding, and the willingness to stand by someone when they needed it the most. Still, the weight of her situation loomed over her. She had come to Earth with a purpose, to study the planet's ecosystems and gather data for her people. But now, with the lockdown extended indefinitely and the distance between her and Nick's growing wider, she didn't know what her future held. The research project she had worked so hard on seemed almost irrelevant in the face of everything else. Jake, on the other hand, was struggling with his own thoughts. The lockdown had turned everything upside down, but it had also given him the chance to truly get to know Jara. She wasn't just the quiet alien who shared his apartment anymore. She was someone he genuinely cared about. She had become a part of his life in a way he hadn't expected. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that their connection was fragile. He wasn't sure what would happen when the lockdown ended. Would things go back to normal, or would the bond they shared only grow stronger? It was late one evening when Jara broke the silence. She had been sitting at the table, staring at her tablet, her antennae twitching slightly as she scanned through data from her research. Jake had been lost in his own thoughts, scrolling through his phone when she finally spoke up. "Jake," she began, her voice hesitant. "I need to talk to you about something." Jake looked up, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What's on your mind?" Jara put down the tablet and turned toward him, her silver eyes meeting his. "I've been thinking a lot about my future, about my mission here on Earth." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You've been thinking about going back to Nick's, haven't you?" Jara nodded slowly. "Yes, the lockdown has kept me here longer than I expected. I've completed most of my research, but I'm not sure if I should stay here any longer. The longer I stay, the more uncertain everything becomes, and I'm not sure if staying here is what I'm meant to do." Jake felt a pang of sadness at her words. He hadn't realized how much pressure Jara had been under. To her, Earth was a strange world, and though she had grown comfortable with human customs and had found her place in their apartment, it wasn't her home. Nick's was her home, and deep down, Jake knew she was torn between her duty to her people and the connection she had begun to form here. "You've been here for months, Jara," Jake said, his voice softer now. "I can't tell you what's right for you. But I know you've built something here. You've become more than just an alien living in my apartment. You've become a part of my life." Jara's gaze softened as she looked at him. "I don't want to leave, Jake, but I feel like I have to. My people are waiting for me. My research needs to be shared with them. It's my responsibility." "I get it," Jake said, though part of him felt like a part of him was slipping away. He didn't want to lose Jara. The thought of her leaving was harder than he expected. "But if you do leave, just know that I'll support you. I understand why you need to go." Jara looked down at the table, her antennae drooping slightly. "I don't know if I can go back to the way things were. I've changed. Being here with you, experiencing all of this, it's made me realize that I've been avoiding something, avoiding connections." Jake sat up straighter. "Connections?" Jara nodded, her voice quiet. "Before I came here, I kept myself detached. I didn't let anyone get close. I thought it was safer that way, but with you, everything's different. I can't pretend that I don't feel something real. It's more than just the heat. It's this bond we've formed, and I don't know what to do with it." Jake's heart skipped a beat. The way Jara spoke, the way she looked at him, it was clear that there was more to this than just a fleeting moment. He had felt it too, but he had been too afraid to admit it. He had been scared of what it meant, of what it could lead to. He wasn't sure if Jara felt the same way he did, but the connection between them was undeniable. "I feel it too," Jake said softly, his voice steady. "I don't know what this is, Jara, but whatever it is, I don't want to lose it. I don't want to lose you." Jara smiled faintly, though it was tinged with sadness. "But I'm not human, Jake. I'm not like you. I don't belong here." "You're wrong," Jake replied firmly. "You belong here. You belong with me. It doesn't matter that you're from another planet. What matters is that we found each other, and that's enough." Jara's eyes softened, and she reached out to take his hand. Her touch was gentle, almost hesitant, but Jake could feel the sincerity behind it. She had always been so careful, so controlled, but now she was allowing herself to be vulnerable with him, to let him in. "I never expected this," Jara said quietly. "I never expected to form such a deep connection with someone from Earth. But now that I've experienced it, I don't know if I can walk away from it." Jake squeezed her hand gently, his heart pounding in his chest. "Then don't. Stay here. Stay with me." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the decision hung between them, but there was something comforting in the silence. Neither of them knew what the future held, but they knew they had something real, something that couldn't be easily dismissed. Finally, Jara spoke, her voice full of uncertainty yet hope. "I don't know what comes next. I don't know if I'm ready to make a decision yet, but I know one thing: I don't want to be alone anymore." Jake smiled, the warmth in his chest spreading. "Then you don't have to be." And with that, the two of them sat together in silence, the bond between them stronger than it had ever been before. The future was uncertain, and the world outside their apartment was still uncertain as well. But for the first time in a long time, Jake felt like everything was going to be okay. They had each other, and that was enough for now. The days that followed were filled with quiet conversations and moments of reflection. Jake and Jara had spent weeks together, sharing their fears, their hopes, and their dreams in a way that neither of them had expected. The connection between them had become undeniable, and as the lockdown stretched on, the apartment felt smaller and more intimate. They had crossed a line from mere roommates to something much deeper, something neither of them could ignore. Despite the growing closeness between them, the question of Jara's future still lingered in the air. It was a question that neither of them knew how to answer. She had come to Earth with a mission, to study the planet's ecosystems and share her findings with her people. The research was important, but the more time she spent with Jake, the more she realized that her life was no longer just about duty or data. There was something else now, something she hadn't anticipated, a bond that went beyond logic, beyond the mission. Jara sat by the window one afternoon, staring out at the busy streets below. The world was still in chaos, but there was something peaceful about the view from their apartment. The sky was a pale shade of blue, and the city seemed to pulse with life, despite the pandemic that had shut everything down. It was strange to think that just a few months ago, she had been focused entirely on her research, not giving much thought to the world around her. But now everything had changed. Jake entered the room quietly, his footsteps muffled by the soft carpet. He had been pacing around the apartment, trying to focus on work, but his mind kept drifting back to Jara. He had never been good at talking about feelings, but he knew that something had shifted between them. The connection they shared was something deeper than just companionship. It was something that felt almost destined, though neither of them would admit it aloud. "Are you okay?" Jake asked, gently walking over to her. Jara turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. Her silver eyes looked tired, but there was a softness in them that he hadn't seen before. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice lacked the usual calm certainty. "Just thinking." Jake sat beside her, close but not too close. There was a certain comfort in their proximity, a quiet understanding that didn't need to be spoken aloud. "About going back to Nick's?" he asked, his voice tentative. He had avoided bringing up the topic for the past few days, not wanting to pressure her, but he couldn't avoid it forever. Jara's expression shifted, and for a moment she looked lost in thought. "Yes," she admitted, "but it's not just about going back. It's about what I've found here, what I've become. I never expected to form such a connection with someone. I never thought I would allow myself to feel something like this." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had been afraid of this conversation, afraid of the reality that Jara might leave, that she might return to Nyx and never look back. But hearing her admit that she had formed a bond with him, that she was conflicted about leaving, filled him with a strange sense of hope. It meant that he wasn't the only one feeling this way. "I know what you mean," Jake said quietly, his voice steady. "I never thought I'd be here feeling the way I do. I didn't expect any of this." "But Jara, you don't have to leave just because it's the right thing to do for your people. You've changed, I've changed. We've both changed. And I don't know where that takes us, but I'm not ready to let go of whatever this is." Jara turned to him, her gaze softening as she absorbed his words. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly let down the walls she had built around her heart. She had spent her life focused on logic, on duty, on the cold truths of science. But what she had found with Jake wasn't about logic. It was about something deeper, something that reached into the very core of who she was. "I don't know what to do," she said softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I never thought I would have to choose between my mission and this. I've been trained to think about the greater good, about what's best for my people. But now I'm not so sure. The bond we share, it's real, Jake. It's not just something temporary, and that scares me." Jake reached for her hand, gently taking it in his. He could feel the tension in her body, the conflict that weighed on her. He knew that leaving Earth would mean leaving behind everything she had come to know, her research, her work, and perhaps him. He couldn't make the decision for her, but he wanted her to know that whatever choice she made, he would support her. "Whatever you choose, I'll be here," Jake said quietly. "I'm not asking you to stay if it means abandoning your mission. But I want you to know that you don't have to choose between your duty and what you feel. It doesn't have to be an either-or situation. We can find a way to make it work, no matter where you are." Jara looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of doubt. But all she saw was sincerity, a deep, unwavering honesty that she hadn't expected from him. She had never been one to trust easily, but Jake had earned that trust, and in that moment she realized that he wasn't asking for anything in return. He was offering her the freedom to make her own decision, free from guilt or obligation. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The words that hung between them were heavy, but not in a bad way. They were just two people, caught between the pull of duty and the promise of something more. Jara had always been driven by her mission, by the need to prove herself to her people. But now she was faced with a new reality, a reality where she didn't have to choose between her work and her feelings. She could have both if she was willing to take the risk. I think I need time," Jara said finally, her voice soft but firm. "Time to figure this out. Time to understand what I really want. I don't want to rush into any decisions, but I also don't want to leave something behind that feels so real." Jake nodded, understanding. "I get it. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Jara smiled faintly, her eyes brightening just a little. "Thank you, Jake. You've given me more than I could ever have asked for." He smiled back at her, a sense of peace settling over him. "We'll figure it out together." As the days passed, the tension between them began to ease. Jara spent more time reflecting on her future, and Jake, though anxious, gave her the space she needed. They shared quiet meals, long conversations, and small moments of comfort that meant more than either of them could say. The connection they had was undeniable, and though neither of them knew what would happen next, they both knew that they didn't want to face it alone. One evening, after weeks of uncertainty, Jara came to Jake with a decision. It wasn't the final decision she had hoped for, but it was the first step. "I've thought about it long and hard," she said, her voice steady, "and I've realized something. I don't have to choose between my people and what I feel. I can be true to both. I can continue my research, but I don't have to leave. I don't have to be alone in this anymore." Jake's heart lifted. "Are you saying?" Jara nodded, her silver eyes meeting his. "I'm staying. For now, I want to be with you, and I want to finish what I started here. But I don't want to leave without exploring what we have together. Whatever happens, I want us to find a way to make it work." Jake didn't say anything at first. He just pulled her into an embrace, holding her tightly, as if he could somehow hold on to this moment forever. He didn't know what the future held for them. There were still uncertainties, still questions. But for the first time, he felt certain of one thing: they would face it together.